Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm Dr. Katherine Horton, and today I have a special guest, Tami from New York. Her and I have been talking a lot about these crimes that are going on. She is, as I said, in New York. I'm in Switzerland. And as we were talking for quite some time in detail, we discovered that there are a lot of parallels between our experiences in the US and in Europe, but there are also some significant differences that indicate that there are programs being rolled out, and they are being rolled out maybe at different paces and different rates and with different objectives between the continents. So today's show will be about mind control technology, but also about other very, very important programs to do with geoengineering and other ways that, this global crime cartel is trying to affect us. And we think that the things we are talking about are not just relevant for us. So don't just take it to be a private conversation between two people, but it's actually of relevance worldwide. So there are millions of people being affected by exactly the programs we're talking about. And we're hoping that by talking about these in public, we can get you to understand just how vast these programs actually are. So hi, Tami, welcome on the show. I'm very, very honored to have you here tonight.
Hi, Dr. Katherine. I'm honored to be here and chatting with you live. And
So,
thank you for doing this today. It's really important for me. I'm sure it is for you too. I don't want to talk for you, but to get this out, people need to know what is happening to people like me and you, and then what they're going to be experiencing, because it's a rollout.
exactly.
It's a rollout.
I think this is exactly it. And I think some topics that people are familiar with are, for example, the rollout of 5G, which, by the way, I've just reviewed that in the UK there has been a successful court case against 5G. And I'm also aware that people are trying to stop the rollout in the US. But there are other programs that are even more covert that people just don't know about, but they are just as, if not even deadlier, than the 5G program. So,
can I just say something about 5G for a second? There all this talk about 5G coming. I think that's a distraction in the background. What they're already doing is the killing program. So I think 5G is like, look over there, while they're doing what they're doing now. That's my take on the 5G thing. And it's getting everybody all up in arms about what's coming, but what's already happening is what's the most important thing.
I totally agree. And I think the one thing, the way we can maybe system judo, so use it against them, because I think you might be right that that's a decoy, that they went with the least evil, to make it public. I think the way to system judo it is to use it almost like a gateway, like an entry topic for people to enter this entire, big genocide program that we're actually talking about. And I guess what I know about 5G is that it's first of all, with the title, it's misleading. Most countries have now rolled out 3G and 4G for the mobile phone communication. It's a data protocol and a data transfer system. And it sounds like 5G is just a faster and better 4G, but it actually is not. It's a fundamentally different technology. And where 3G and 4G mobile phone towers have been broadcasting kind of, sending waves everywhere, 5G is focused pulses. So the idea is to really target individual devices in a very specific way. But this entire technology is, I personally think, a decentralized weapon system, because with the same setup, you can also shoot people in the head electromagnetically, cause car accidents, and all this sort of stuff.
So I want to say on my devices, 5G is already available. So nothing's changed. And, I could go to 5G if I want to click onto a network where on my computer it says, do I want to sign in? Do I want to go under the 5G? I have that choice. So it's already rolled out, number one. And number two is I still think that they're rolling out so many different, it's never one thing. Never one thing. They like to, and when I say they, I'm talking about, I call the deep state, but they're a global cartel, Nazi organization who is, their goal is a genocide program. the same goal that was done in Nazi Germany. It was all about genocide. It was really a satanic or Luciferian ritual sacrifice of millions of people. And for this way, they're able to, number one, asset strip is something I've always heard you say. And yes, and number two, control. And number three, just this power that they get. And they also get this kind of occultist black magic stuff from doing these things. That's just my take on what they're doing.
I think that's right, and there are other people who have reported that and have, you know, historic evidence that, for example, in Nazi Germany, there have been ritual sacrifice in the streets. Okay, so this is something that our history books don't tell us, that they had, well, occult. I always take occult to be a, you know, a code word for secretive, psychopathic things going on, but they actually had what we would now these days term satanic sacrifice also Nazi Germany. It wasn't just the Nazi ideology as it's presented to us in a very sanitized form. It was actually an even more ancient satanic system. And I think you're absolutely right that we see the continuation of that. And the reference to Nazi Germany, by the way, also the communist mass slaughter and mass genocide of the Russian and Chinese populations falls under the same thing. I think what these were large-scale programs to test how many people they can kill and how many assets they can get you know, grab for themselves. And sadly, the last three large-scale, well, they actually had more tests, but the really large-scale tests were these, the communist genocides and Nazi genocides. They were super successful. And these people, you know, the Nuremberg process was a complete hoax or fake, the large part, and they got away with it all.
So that's why, for that reason, when we talk about 5G, it's like, look over there, look over there. When it's a tactic. It's a tactic. So, and I want to talk about what they're doing here in the United States right now, which is it's just another form of a genocide, and it's also ties into this whole network of mind control, and it's with what they're spraying. It's what the geoengineering aerosol spraying, and a lot of people have identified Morgellons as a symptom of this bigger issue. And you said when I spoke with you in the past, you don't see a lot of it where you are, but I'll tell you what's going on here. So what happens once these people get this in their body, and once you just walk outside when they're spraying, you're getting it. And they've been spraying for decades now. They've been spraying since, I think, 2003. I started seeing the skies in New York getting crazy with spraying. So what they've identified in the trails are nanoparticles of metals, heavy metals, and they're like little hexagons. They're also identifying fungi, which then grows, and then a parasite, which also takes over. So it's a kill program, and then the heavy metals is part of making us into a mechanical antenna to be receptive to what else is coming down the pike, which is, you know, I want you to talk about what you know about some of the other technologies, which if we become an antenna, because we have so much metal in us that we're actually able to receive signals, then we're easily able to be a remote controlled object. And I would like you to talk about what you know about those type of mind control things, like people have experienced V2K or weapons. But when we have a lot of metal, heavy metal nanoparticles in us, besides the fungus which makes us sick and the parasites, you know, then we become this other type of, you know, being which is receptive. Can you talk more about those types of things that you're experiencing in Europe?
Yeah, I can talk about that, and I can also talk about the insight I have from dealing with victim cases. So I think you're absolutely right. So for those people who need to be brought up to speed, first of all, many people still don't know that the what was termed as a cover-up condensation trails from jets flying overhead, they cannot be condensation trails because the way the jet engines are operating, they cannot produce condensation trails unless it's really freak, weather conditions and atmospheric conditions. So it's a real outlier to see jets, make these lines all the time, very persistent lines that last for hours and hours. It is just not possible. So people need to be brought up to speed from condensation trails, which is what used to be the only acceptable thing to call them in the mainstream. Now we publicly know that they are chemtrails and they are court cases against geoengineering. And now the next step is to realize, hang on, it's not just the geoengineering that's going on. There's also what maybe could be called smart dust raining down on us and getting into all the organisms. So as you said, it's already established that these chemtrails have heavy metals in them and so on. And the next step is then to realize how these heavy metals are arranged. And you pointed to these nanocrystals and these little hexagons and other structures. And where the real money and cartel interest lies right now is to have a method to self-assemble and self-replicate technology inside us. In other words, we breathe it in or we take it in through our food that has been coated with this stuff, or maybe has been ingested by animals that we eat, or maybe the milk we drink. So one way or another, we get the stuff in us, and once it's inside us, either it self-activates or it can be remotely activated to start the self-assembly process. And I think this is why it is great that you pointed out the three mechanisms. So you have the ingredients that you have.
There's a lot of feedback. Just want to let you know there's a lot of noise. I don't know if it's on your end, but I'm hearing screechy noises.
Okay. One way we can cut that out. Can you see the microphone button at the top of your screen? If you switch off your microphone when I'm speaking, they can't feed back the audio from your end. And then when you speak, you just have to remember to unmute yourself.
You know what? You know how low tech.
So hang on.
I am. I don't see them now.
Oh, it's I can show you. So it by the way, I can also show it for other people who have the very same problem.
Oh wait, I think I do. Let me just see if that's a little microphone.
This box.
Yeah, I think I see it.
And that's the microphone. So just click on unmute or mute, and then unmute when you want to speak. And then and now it's gone quiet. So to me it sounds like it had been solved. But what they do, to explain it to the viewers, sometimes you get this feedback and sometimes we do not. And
see, that's what happens when I start. Oh, wait a second. Now I have. You can't hear me, right?
I can hear you now. I can hear you now. Try to mute yourself. Yes, now I can see you muted yourself. And yes, perfect. So now there's no feedback. So just to explain to our viewers, every single time investigators start talking about topics like smart dust, chemtrails, mind control, and this sort of these cartel programs that affect a lot of people, we suddenly get, GCHQ, NSA style hacking and all sorts of disruptions that are designed to appear natural, but are everything but. And with time, you can see a direct correlation with the actual topics you're talking about, and not so much correlation with, the bandwidth you have or the setup that you're using. So anyway, this is what we were fighting just now. But anyway, so as you identified the three important ingredients, so if you really wanted to have this sort of self-assembling technology, you would typically need some sort of heavy metal, something that you could build electronics from, or maybe conducting pathways. If you can combine that with, let's say, a fungus that grows inside the body and maybe takes on some of these heavy metals and incorporates it in the fungus, then you can build a web, a meshing in the human body. And then depending on, you can have this, and then you can also combine it with what I see in a lot of victim cases to this day is that it's combined with pretty big hardware. So with big, I mean, you know, the size of a microchip, or small, you know, plates that's smaller than a corn of rice. So those are typically RFID or radio frequency chips in general. And what I suspect is happening is that you have these bigger little units that are implanted in humans, and then they interface with the, you know, this meshing and this distributed network of much finer stuff. And I think it's this dual system. You get the fairly large hardware, you know, that is communicating, for example, with the WLAN, with the Wi-Fi system, with the mobile phone system, where a lot of power is involved. And then within the body, you have this distributed network of chips or self-assembled stuff, where you have much finer control over the organism. And so far, this is what I have seen. So people have very weird medical symptoms that have never been described in the history of medicine before, which indicates some sort of new parasite, new fungus, new disease, or new thing happening to them. And then these victims typically also have some sort of radio frequency chips on their heads, you know?
I just want to just jump in with that because, yes, I have had symptoms that are so bizarre. None of the doctors that I've ever seen, even the holistic ones, have been able to help me because they've not been taught about dealing with in non-organic particles, smart dust, and stuff like this. They didn't learn this in medical school, so they have no idea how to help people with this. And so some of the symptoms that I've had, you know, fibromyalgia, a lot of pain all the time. And I don't want to get into all of my stuff, but yes, it's causing a lot of damage in people's bodies, and people are dying much younger and getting, you know, all types of cancer and all types of, you know, Alzheimer's, you know, dementia, all this stuff early, way too early.
You know, when we're saying early, I think it should also be emphasized that we are talking. I think it was Karen Melton Stewart, the NSA whistleblower, who told me that they have diagnosed children, school children, with Alzheimer's. This is just not normal. You know,
Yeah,
you just don't have a
makes perfect
neurodegeneration.
sense.
Yeah. And I think that's it kind of that indicates the trajectory we're on, because these things are typically neurodegenerative. So something is attacking our nervous system, and most importantly, our brain. And, you know, the cartel purpose behind that is pretty obvious, you know?
So I just want to move on a little bit. You know, I don't have a lot of time today, and I'm so grateful to have this time to share with you. On my Facebook live streams that I do, a lot of my friends who don't really know a lot about this stuff, and they're really curious about mind control, MK Ultra, B2K, and all these things that people who have talked about this for years know about. But for most people, they have no idea, you know, what this and why people are acting so weird, especially in college towns. They have like these safe spaces now where you can't mention certain words, because if you mention that word, the person will go crazy, kind of like what they used to do in the CIA when they were making somebody into a Manchurian or whatever they were using. They would use a key word, and that would be a set off. So now they have in universities in the US safe spaces where you can't mention, you know, I don't even want to say the words on this video, right? But you can't mention certain words. Otherwise, they have to go into a safe space. And if they're in that safe space, no one's allowed to say those words. And it's usually
Is it
not,
Trump by any chance?
yes, that's one of the words, and conservative, and anything to do with people that are fighting the deep state, anything to do with that. So, you know, because these, from what I see, they're mind controlling people to work for them against their own best interest in helping them pull this new world order through. And these people are unknowingly doing it. How does that happen?
Gosh, this is, I mean, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And the First of all, what is happening? I mean, the entire term New World Order is actually, in my view, the old world order of rule by organized crime. And the purpose
Yes.
of this is that they want to incorporate more and more people and suck more and more people into the organized crime cartel. And by the way, this is what happened during the Second World War. A lot of people who were not insiders were just killed off. So what remained were the families who knew the cartel signaling, the cartel symbolism, and were insiders. They were in on it. So they were placed into government offices and key positions. And, you know, they didn't kill quite everybody who didn't know about this stuff, but they, you know, they had a good stab at it. And now they can do the same thing again. So in a sense, the population has been expanding very quickly. And they were trying to recruit cartel insiders in school, university, everywhere. But sometimes, you know, the population is expanding faster than they can corrupt people. And then typically they want a cult to just reestablish control again. And this is, I think, the cycle that has been happening. Now, in the olden days, it was blackmail, you know, bribery, control files, incriminating people and sort of stuff. Now, this entire topic of mind control and what the CIA has been, not just the CIA, but pretty much every secret service on the planet has been working on guaranteeing this cartel control with an increase in population and also with an increase of information flow through the internet. So they had to match the explosion in information over the internet with equally powerful technology that can make you impervious. They can make your brain instantly so thick that you don't even understand the new information that you're being presented with. This is, I think, the simplest way to describe it. So what we have, well, what we have all observed in maybe family and friends and people elsewhere is that they just don't get certain things, or they, as you say, react in such a weird way that it's just not normal. And the question is now, how the hell did the Secret Service pull that off? And I think the, you know, the ingestion of very fine technology, by the way, also technology that crosses the blood-brain barrier and self-assembles itself in the brain, or maybe has been, you know, put on the brain or in the brain by, you know, manual access, that has just been expanded. So all these sorts of technologies that are covert and can influence the mind have exploded. So there are several different technologies. Number one is this sort of very fine stuff that gets into an organism. So neural lace, smart dust, and all this sort of stuff. Then there's the category of fairly old tech, which is these RFID chips that are the strongest emitters, as far as I can tell, implanted on the back of the head, the top of the head, and the neck. And sometimes, so these are chips that are broadcasting nonstop. And because there's a nonstop broadcast, what a lot of people also experienced was a thinning of hair in the regions of the chip. You know, also women who otherwise are not suffering from hair loss. So that can be at the top or at the back of the head and stuff like that. Now, these are RFID chips that can be, you know, triangulated, can be accessed, and they seem to be also controlling what's known as a body area network. So the classic body area networks, they are, you know, RFID chips with a strong emitter somewhere, typically in the head region, but could also be elsewhere. And then a distributed network of more, I think, less intensely broadcasting chips. But they are communicating nevertheless. Now, if you have this sort of system, what you can do is, well, it's fairly easy to understand that if you have a chip somewhere that can release a current, and maybe it's being charged through Wi-Fi or through pulses that are shot at the chip, if you have it somewhere in your muscles, it's easy to understand that you can make muscles contract and release, you know, just by using these sort of impulses. But when it's around the head, if you have these sort of chips, you can measure electric fields and you can do a remote EEG of the human brain. And even that technology is ancient. So you can get into more and more detail. And eventually what you end up with is you can measure the emotional state of a person.
Wait, can you just mute me again for a minute? Because I'm getting a lot of the feedback again.
Do you
Show me how to go to the mute.
Can you mute?
You put it up on my screen before. Now I can't see it.
Sorry, no, what I mean is you have to, on your screen, you have to
I
find.
know, but it's not available unless you put it back up there. So,
Hang on. Okay. What I can do is I can mute you from my end. So I'll do that, and then I'll unmute you. So I've just muted you, and then I'll unmute you in a moment. So just to finish off, this technology, and I'm explaining this in a slightly more detail because once you know what you're dealing with, you know how to find it out, what sort of tests you need to take to have the evidence if you have this technology or not. So the simplest thing to detect is really this body area network and these radio frequency chips, because they can be found with the bug detector. And you can measure the radio frequency emissions from these chips, which typically are, sometimes very close to mobile phone frequencies. And the human body doesn't emit in these sort of frequencies. If it did, we could literally hear our bodies on a radio, on a mobile phone as interference, but we don't. And that's because we are not emitting at these high frequencies. But mind control now is so fine and so far advanced that what victims report is that they feel that their thoughts are being controlled. They get repetitive messages. They get their mind locked into certain thought patterns. They feel that their moods can be changed at the flick of a switch, pretty much. And they can also be made to move or even say stuff that is totally remote controlled. So it's frightening, really.
yeah, so I want to jump in and say that, I think that it's beyond the RFID chip at this point. I don't think it's even necessary. They showed that in the Gulf War and the Iraq, I think it was the Iraq War. The Gulf War, they showed the bioweapons that they're using on people, which is the stuff I talked about that's coming down, they're spraying down. And they call it Gulf War syndrome, which is the diseases people are getting now. Fibromyalgia, Morgellons, all those other symptoms of Epstein-Barr, feeling sick all over, and the early Alzheimer's. That's Gulf War syndrome, from what I understand. But in the Iraq War, they were able to take a whole group of people and give them a message through V2K, voice to skull. They weren't all chipped. All these soldiers were not chipped, but they were able to hear, and they thought, oh my God, Allah is talking to me. And they put down their guns. They just gave up. And they were also able to use that with the US military in order to give them messages that were private, so that, because they were in like sometimes areas that were dangerous if they couldn't broadcast, but they were able to get the message right in their head without it being broadcast to the next person right near them. So not everybody's chipped that gets these messages. They're using remote control now.
Well, one of the things I think we need to be careful about is the following. So first of all, it is in principle possible. I mean, there's something called the Fry effect. If you've got a very intense, microwave beam, you can make it be heard. Now, the point where I think we have to be careful with that is that people who have voice, so I think it's a difference if you have, say, an army out in an open field being blasted by heck knows what waves from the US military. Okay, that's one category. When we have voice to skull and victims, they report that they hear voice to skull at perfect pitch and always the same volume and high quality, even if they go into their basement, if they are somewhere else, they're walking up and down the house. If you just use the simple microwave beam, the classical beam, if you're going inside a house, you would have the house wall, maybe, unless you get a direct line of sight through the window. Now, that reduces your intensity by 50% if it's a microwave beam. If you have two walls, you're down to a quarter of the initial intensity. So, as you're moving around the house, you have different walls, different angles, different thickness of wall. I would think it would be extremely hard to maintain perfect voice to skull if what they used would be just microwaves. Now, the classical step up from that is to have little receivers in your ear, which are a bit like small versions of mobile phones that convert electrical signals or electromagnetic waves into sound in your ear or maybe into vibrations on your bone and use bone conduction. If you use the sort of mobile phone system, then just as much as you have very good reception, sometimes inside your cellar with a mobile phone, you know, that's already, you know, a better technology. Now, if you had these implants and you used maybe a new waveform that passes through walls even better than classical electromagnetic waves, then you could do exactly what they are describing. Now, when you said that the Iraqi soldiers were chipped, I would first have to check that. And the reason why I would say that is because my colleague Melanie Richan and I know from a microwave weapons expert that the military has been chipped serially since at least the 1960s. So these soldiers, if they're soldiers, they are owned wholesale by the cartel. They are cannon fodder. So any sort of new technology would be guinea pigged on them if they know it or not. And the more I see civilians being chipped en masse, the more I suspect that if you're a soldier, you probably were chipped without your knowledge. I mean, at least you will have some dinky little RFID thingy somewhere on you, just so that they can identify you. So I'm not sure, but in principle, yes, you can use that. And actually,
I was talking about the Iraqis. They weren't chipped. I mean, these were regular civilians. They
well,
were not chipped, and they heard V2K. So
were these soldiers or civilians? Because I mean,
they were civilians and soldiers both putting down their weapons because they heard a voice, which they thought was Allah, telling them, you must stop.
so
And they stopped.
With that, there is a technology called directed sound. So you can, use a certain setup and have this sort of direct sound. And as I said, because it's sound, still using sound waves, you need to have, a direct, you couldn't do it through several walls, as much as you can't send sound. But this, I think it's called directed sound. I have to look up the exact maker, but there's a TED talk on this, on the technology. And you can even buy it so that advertising, if you go into a shopping mall, they would have a directed sound setup. So if you're going through the beam, the sound beam, you would hear the advert talk to you personally and nobody else around you could hear it. And there's, for example, sound systems set up that two people sitting on the same sofa can listen to two different programs because the sound is beamed at them. So that is certainly possible. And as I said, if it's out in the field, that's I think the easiest and simplest technology to use. When we're talking about victims of voice to skull who hear voices 24/7, inside, outside, in the cellar, in the attic, absolutely everywhere, walking around the house, I think that is a different technology,
So let's move on to the cases that are already going to court. There are some from the Cuban diplomats and the people that were in China. They were also U.S. diplomats that were being hit with weapons to the head, and it's sonic weapons. Do you know the difference between these things? Because these people got brain damage in Cuba, and they lawyered up. And, it wasn't the Cubans have no benefit in doing this. Like, they want to bring U.S. business. They want to open up. They did want to. And then after that happened, President Trump had to shut it down because our diplomats were getting assaulted. And it was happening from some rogue force, put it that way.
Yeah, I think we both know who the rogue force is. It's the same force going rogue in the US and Europe. I think that was precisely the objective. I think the objective is just like on the macro scale and on the international scale, it's to cause division. The worst thing for the cartel is if we all teamed up, literally across China, Russia, India, Iran, Iraq, all of us, Syria, US, Europe, if we all teamed up and kicked out the crime cartel, it would be game over. So what they have to do is set up these games of all the Russians did it, all the Cubans or the Chinese did it. And there's literally just one entity that benefits. And for everybody else, it's just, no gain. Now, the first thing I would like to say about the diplomats is that I question if it was sonic weapons. I think sonic weapons exist, but they only go so far. And a better mode is directed energy weapons. So for example, microwave weapons. Microwaves go through walls. So if you wanted to assault a diplomat sitting in, at his desk, if you used something, I mean, yeah, sonic weapons, I would have to check, what their transmission rate is through glass. But, if it's sonic, if it's literally air vibrations, if you really wanted to go through glass or double glazing, I mean, you would have a hard time. But if you use microwaves, the transmission through glass is nearly 100%. If it's through a wall, it's 50%. So you just double the intensity and you can just blast this person. So when I heard this, sonic weapon attacks, I think that was exactly what you said in the beginning. It's like, oh, look over here, look over here. Don't look in the directed energy market or you might get scared. So I actually think these were microwave weapon attacks or directed energy weapon attacks. And I think the latest news actually said that, oh, some doctors discovered that it was microwave weapons, Ooh, so they migrated one up. I think it's actually could be much more exotic weapons, but yes, that's certainly microwave weapons. The other thing I would like to say is that diplomats, just like soldiers, are literally owned wholesale. They are physically owned, even though that they don't know it, by the cartel. They are cartel agents. So the cartel thinks it is their property. So of course the diplomats are chipped. The diplomats are chipped even for security reasons, to know, if they get kidnapped or something. So once you have a chip, the other thing that can be done is weapons can triangulate. So if you send an electromagnetic pulse through a wall and you're trying to calibrate a system, if you had a chip that is signaling back, yes, I received the energy, you can, and if you have several little chips and you can play this game, you can literally trace out the human body shape through a wall by just sending a fast series of pulses. So to the diplomats and their legal team, I would say, look for RFID chips, do a measurement, and second of all, go and see a dermatologist and look for laser surgery scars, especially on the neck and in the facial region, because when they put in these little chips, to this day, they are putting in RFID chips by laser surgery. So that's a quick, surgery. By the way, it's done on civilians, typically on single moms who are very exposed, living alone somewhere with their child, and they have a child that can be experimented on as well. So what's being done to these people is that the secret services and, the entire network of associates, they have business plans running when they are breaking into homes and they are implanting people. And I think by now it must be literally like a Formula One pit stop, done within seconds, because as I understand it, they use a laser scalpel. So they make a small incision, which doesn't bleed because the blood coagulates directly through the laser. You put in a microchip, and then you put on what's called tissue glue, and then you just put it together, hold it for a few seconds, and you're out of the house. And what you've done is you have implanted a microchip that you can activate later and log in. And then the person just wakes up with a scratch that looks like a scratch from a cat, So I personally would advise the diplomats, anybody in fact, not just the diplomats, as soon as you're being attacked with a directed energy weapon, know that it's so much more efficient if you have little body chips that can broadcast to send back the information for mapping out how exactly you're being hit. And this is how it's done.
I just want to interrupt you. Once we go into, could you hear it for a second? Because I'm hearing a lot of feedback. Once we go into break-ins and people being chipped, we lose a lot of people. But I will tell you that women that go in for cosmetic surgery, people that go in for surgery for all different things, and vaccinations are clearly an avenue that people have identified being chipped. Now, somebody I know who joined the military, they have to get this, it's either called a peanut butter vaccination. He told me it was such a thick needle and such thick stuff that of course there were chips in it. And you cannot be in the military unless you get that. So that to me opens up more doors of people of understanding how a lot of people get chipped. You know, because people go in for all different things, whether they're getting vaccinated, whether they're getting a procedure done where they're under anesthesia, or whether they're actually getting some type of surgery. That's just straightforward. So that we know the medical industry, a lot of people are getting involved, you know, in this whole horrible program.
Oh, that is 100% true, because actually the I would also assume that for decades certain corrupted surgeons have been putting in chips during surgeries routinely, serially, and I think this is where we have to get to. We have to collect, we have to do all these body scans and then trace it back and see if we maybe see overlaps and clusterings with certain surgeons. I bet, I literally bet that we will do that, and we will find this sort of information. Now, the thing about the break-ins, where I think you're right, it's so scary that people just block. Now, that information, that's a fact, comes from many victim testimonies, but also from the testimony of Carl Clark, who is a whistleblower, who was a former Secret Service agent working for MI6, and also I think as a contractor for Mossad and you know, any other intelligence agency you know, you can think of. So he had he has been working for several people, but he testified, and it's in the German, he went public in the German press, that yes, the secret services in Europe do break into people's homes. And they do, for example, take blood samples and other things. So I don't think he testified to the chipping directly, but he described in detail how it's done. And what's typically done is, he says, they pump an anesthetic through the letterbox or under the door or somehow into a home. I personally think they also pump gases through, for example, the water pipes. So it starts pouring into you and filling into your home. But anyway, once the people are anesthetized, they come in and they can do whatever they like, and then they leave. They can make copies of keys. And I think that's also a business plan that's being rolled out, you know.
So I'm sorry, we have to move along on different topics. Oh, we have a little more time, but yes, and I heard, I think that was Ship, Kevin Ship, the CIA whistleblower, who talks about they put him in a home and his family while he was working for the CIA that was completely poisoned. They were doing all sorts of things to him and his family, and he talks about the whole, what they've done to him as a CIA agent. And I just want to go to the next thing, because you did something on Twitter yesterday that people that think they live in haunted houses are probably infested with intel and rogue elements going on there. And I'm so glad you put that out there, because these are happening in their homes and they don't know what it is exactly. And I could talk from experience that things happened to me in 2000, starting in 2000, in the home, that were bizarre. And I don't even want to go into all the details because it's so insane, but it's electrical. It was electrical, like things would go on and off. The heat would go to 90. People would see things in the house, and it was an old house, you know, so people that it's haunted. And but the interesting thing is, things were happening to my health in that house. And that doesn't make any sense. And so, you know, if you want to talk about that a little, because I thought that post was really, really cool that you did yesterday on Twitter.
So I absolutely, you know what, one of the things that I find over and over in victim stories is that it's curiously always mirrors precisely what Hollywood has been putting out in horror movies, you know, like exactly. It's almost like, you know, whatever, your local poltergeist is watching Hollywood movies, you know, it's like, how the hell does that happen? And I guess the connection is that Hollywood is infested with the CIA, you know, and mind control technologies and all that sort of stuff. And the films are being used to advertise the technology and to advertise it to the cartel, you know. So you get a lot of this cartel signaling that then I find in victim reports, you know, and sometimes they haven't seen the films where this is the technology is being advertised. So when you combine the two, you can figure out like, oh, hang on a second, this is, and then eventually you hear about the technology being sold commercially that can achieve exactly what they're talking about. So, for example, I mean, if you're talking about haunted houses, what could this be? This could be, for example, hearing steps in a room or in the attic above you. Now, that sort of effect can be done with directed energy weapons. For example, if you shoot an electromagnetic pulse of a certain waveform, a pulsed energy projectile at the metal pipes in the house, you can make this sort of knocking, just like your central heating, if it needs airing, it can make a rather loud knocking sound. You can achieve the same thing by just hitting certain pipes or cables in the home. And then you can also make wood make this sort of thud sound. So it suddenly sounds like something fell down in the attic or a room next to you, and when you go, there's nothing. So people always have this assumption that if you hear a sound, there must be an actual hard object creating the sound, but that's not true. You can have waves do the same thing. Now, that's one topic in itself, and this is directed energy weapons. Then your house can, of course, be bugged. And as much as you can have, microphones, you can also have little speakers in your house. So if you hear whispers or any other stuff, it could be done literally by little speakers. Or else, if it's just you hearing it and it doesn't show up on an audio recorder, then it's most likely voice to skull. And you literally have what I consider to be highly likely an ear implant, So the technology is in you. But then there's an entire big topic about seeing things. And victims have been reporting seeing crazy stuff like, I don't know, ghosts, witches, apparitions from medieval ages. You have literally a medieval knight coming in and maybe lobbing your head off with a sword, or about to, or snakes or dead people or spiders, oversized spiders coming and going, appearing and disappearing. Now, people have been talking about like, oh, maybe it's a hologram. And yes, in principle, it could be. And that's an entire topic that I don't really know much about, how that's done. But what it's also can be in many cases, and many, many more cases that people are comfortable with, it's eye implants. And one type of eye implant that, has already been found in victims, it's like a contact lens. And it's it's completely transparent and very hard to see because it's extremely thin. And it's so-called thin film technology. And what it is, it's almost like a little LCD screen that you can place on your eyeball, or somebody else can place on your eyeball when you're sleeping or when you're anesthetic. And it attaches very well and very, tightly to your eye. And then the only way to tell that you have it in your eye is to use an ultraviolet light, because then suddenly your eye will start reflecting in funny colors, for example, dark purple or bright green. And then you can tell that some sort of thing is on the lens. Once you have it on your lens, this thing has a little readout unit, or a little unit where it can actually send little movies. And using modern software technology, what can be done is it records what you see and projects in, perfectly calculated by a computer, an object that's not there, but it's on your lens, and to you it will appear like if it's in the room, but actually it's just projected onto this contact lens. Only you can see it. But it's done so perfectly that they can, make it match up with the objects you see in the room. So the spider will not be half in the cupboard and half out. It will actually be on the floor on free space, for example. And then you see it, and then you blink and it's gone. And if the victims are being exposed to that, it's freakish. I mean, it's really scary because they can show you all sorts of stuff. But ultimately, it is just a little technology in your eye,
I just want to jump in with the chipping is it takes a lot of people off the subject. So I want to go into that. They are using black magic, okay, for sure. I know from my own experience that people are doing this kind of stuff, okay? I've overheard in a cult that I thought was a spiritual cult what they do. And it's animal sacrifice. And then what they do is black magic. So we're talking about two different things right now. And I can tell you, from my own experience, they're using that and they're calling in entities. So that is another subject for another day, I really think. But I want to just go over something that you said, because I was thinking the Truman Show, like, and they just identified dragonfly. Okay, so if they just identified dragonfly in China, that means they've been using dragonfly for a long time. Now, dragonfly is something that Google is working with in China as a censorship and as a spy program to know everything that everyone's doing at all times. So it kind of reminds me of the Truman Show, where, did you see that movie, Dr. Catherine? Okay, so it's like he has no clue, but all these psychopaths are watching everything he's doing. And that's an old movie. And when, when I first saw that movie, it was just all like science fiction. But now it's nonfiction. It's actually what they're doing. So, and we need to wrap it up too on that note, that they're starting to now say, yes, China, they're using it in China, but they're not going to use it in the USA, which means they're already using it in the USA, and it's all underhanded, all, within these certain groups of rogue, elements that are doing it. And, it's kind of scary, that whole thing. Do you know much about Dragonfly?
I don't know anything about that in particular. I haven't been following that, but one of the things that is already in the public domain about the surveillance in the USA is what all the NSA whistleblowers have been talking about, which is this mass surveillance. And I don't think that anybody actually, apart from them, really fully understand the scale of it. So we hear that all of our phone calls, including the content, the email, including the content, Skype calls, video chat, social media, including the content, is all not just being recorded and stored, but I think also analyzed and also used nonstop daily on all of us, and we're not seeing that. I think that is the full picture. And people barely understand. So the typical thing is to say, oh, yes, they can collect it because I don't have anything to hide. And they still think that the FBI, CIA, and these alphabet soup and law enforcement agencies are there to protect them and to fight crime. They never were to start with. They were always set up to protect one big organized crime syndicate, a corporation, a very ancient little mafia that's now massive. And it's not about what you have got to hide. It is about how much money can the mafia make of you using your own data and your own weaknesses against you. Are your daughter's weaknesses, can she be made to, I don't know, develop some psychiatric disease and then take, psychotropic drugs until the end of her days? Yeah, sure as hell she can be. Now that's what this data is being used for, So this is what it actually is about. And the Truman Show, I can tell you, was not even a fictional story. It was cartel signaling. It was a cartel documentary about stuff that they're already doing. And that's the way I see it. And there's lots of evidence for that. So mass surveillance in the US has already been implemented a long time ago. And the people to really, listen to on that is, Kirk Wiebe, William Binney, the NSA whistleblowers. Karen Melton Stewart talks a lot about exactly the sort of Truman Show experience of nonstop surveillance and being hit with direct LNG weapons. Thomas Drake blew the whistle on it. Edward Snowden, of course, right? And there are entire movies, thank goodness, on that. For example, A Good American and Snowden, the movie. And it's all there. That's all there. The only thing that people are missing is what that's being used for, I think.
So I just want to say some good news and then we'll wrap up. So some good news. We found, 90% of the stuff is being made in China with these chips in it. Every single smart device we have. They're putting a camera looking back. And so now that they've identified it, which means it's been going on for years, we can start doing something about it. So our president, I believe it was in one of the posts that I read that, of course, he wants to start bringing more manufacturing to the US, but also ask Google to stop that program. which was a really big step. And I also want to say, you know, you're not in the US, but what's going on here is really awesome, because a lot of these rogue alphabet, you know, agents, they're getting exposed and getting fired one at a time. And a lot of the pedophilia rings and the trafficking rings, which are the glue that holds all of this cartel crime syndicate together, is also they're being chipped at, taken down a lot in the US. A lot of them are coming down, and they don't even post it in the mainstream media, because they don't post anything that our president does that's actually helping to take this stuff down. They don't even, it's not even in the news at all. We have to find this stuff on YouTube, which is, it's totally insane, but that's what's happening here. So I just wanted to say there's some good things happening here, except it's not on the mainstream media.
Sorry.
And I think that you told me that in the UK, they're also taking down some of these pedo rings, which again is the glue. It's what's keeping them in business, because this is the file that they have to keep these people from talking about it, from, you know, ratting out somebody else, because they all have a control file, and it goes all the way down to the lowest denominator, which is pedophilia, trafficking, murder, rape, and all that stuff.
That is 100% correct. So I can confirm that in the UK, we or they, because I'm not in the UK anymore, they have the largest wave of arrests of pedophiles, I think, in history, and that should be across all the newspapers, but it's not. And the reason why it's not across all the newspapers, if I may just show one plot, very important. This was actually done by a Swiss research institute. If our viewers search for the American Empire and its media, you will get to the Swiss Propaganda Research Institute, and here is a plot, and you can see similar plots for the Swiss media and the German media, and it goes through all the mainstream media outlets here. I mean, you will find everything like the Financial Times, the Economist, Time, Washington Post, CNN, and the key people who are then in turn connected to the Bilderberg meeting, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Commission. And these are the control arms of the cartel. And you can see just from this plot that the Council on Foreign Relations is massively important. Now, this is actually has been quoted by Hillary Clinton herself, that she gets her orders from the Council on Foreign Relations. There's actually an interview snippet with her. So if you're wondering why the mainstream media are not reporting about cartel shenanigans, it's because they are owned wholesale by the cartel. That's it. So, and the final thing to say, my final message is that, yes, pedophilia is right at the heart of everything. It is the most, pedophilia, necrophilia, murder, and this sort of stuff. But the rape and murder of children has been absolutely hideous and revolting, considered revolting by the vast majority of the population throughout history. That's the one constant. It was never okay. And that is one of the strongest control files to have. And this is why children have been kidnapped and satanically abused en masse. And we're talking in the hundreds of thousands, every year. And it has already been, I think Ted Gunderson blew the whistle on that, and John DeCamp as well. And yes, that goes right to the heart of it. So if you are solving the pedophile rings, if you're busting the pedophile rings, you're also busting the cartel and also the control files that are placed on politicians and people in the media. So it also.
And I just want to say one thing. You might not have heard this, but yesterday Hillary Clinton lost her Q clearance along with Huma Abedin and all of her people, and so did a lot of CIA operatives, and so did a lot of FBI operatives over the last month. So things are definitely happening. Let's leave it on a good note that things are happening, and let's do this again. I love talking with you, Dr. Katherine. Always a pleasure, and I wish you well, and I wish well to everybody who's listening to this. I hope that you find some healing and peace, and I hope that we all have a remedy to this complete horrific show we've been involved with for decades.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. I think the overall picture is that the cartel is going down. So I always say, you know, these satanic horns that they were flashing, well, the horns are pointing down now. Sad horns, you know, sad little sad Satanists going down. So this is really the message. And yes, you're right, there's healing and there's a cure for pretty much everything, and that's actually the next step that we can talk about maybe next time. It's about the releasing of the cures, because they will not unleash any plague unless they themselves have the cure for it, because there's always a finite chance of being infected. So there is a cure for most cancers. Actually, they have been patented. Some people rumored that the Rockefellers have the patents for a lot of the cancers and the cancer cures. So yeah, and this will be the next step. So I guess people should be routing for, you know, top leadership in the NSA, because the NSA owns the entire communication system. So if we get a white hat into the NSA and the president who wants to declassify and release, they will get their hands on the cures. So that will be the next step. But anyway, I guess that's enough for today. So
for today. And we'll leave it on that note that I think that we're in the right direction. Things are starting to move, not as quickly as we want, but we're seeing some things happening here. So Dr. Katherine and everybody, I wish you well, and I look forward to another one of these chats.
Absolutely. So thank you, everybody, and talk to you soon. And bye for now.
Okay.